This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. It's a 90s movie about Robin Williams dressing up as a woman to spend time with his kids, and it has aged about as well as you think. It's Mrs. Doubtfire, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to the 43rd episode of This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. It's Mrs. Doubtfire.
Or Madam Doubtfire.
Or alias Madam Doubtfire, as we've learned. Several names. We were both very surprised that this was based on a book, and we were not alone. We posted, when we posted we were doing this on social media, it had quite the response of people saying, "What?
Yeah.
No idea that was based on a book." So, but we did notice in the opening credits, it's right there, full screen.
Very large print.
Based on the novel by Anne Fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is absolutely based on a book, and we're going to break down how based on that book it is. And how much of it is just Robin Williams making things up, which I think is most of it. So
it seems to be what filmmakers just let him do.
Yes.
Make it up as he went along.
Absolutely. So we'll get to our first segment, which is Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
In Let Me Sum Up, we each take a turn describing the rough plot of the book. Katie does the book, then I will do the movie. Just in case you haven't seen them or read them, you get a little bit of a feel. There are spoilers, so if you want to avoid... There are spoilers throughout our podcast, so if you're worried about spoilers, this isn't really a big spoilery type one. But if you are worried about spoilers, just letting you know now. But Katie, why don't you quickly sum up, because there is not time, alias Madam Doubtfire, while I don't listen and pay attention.
Daniel and Miranda Hillard were unhappily married and are now unhappily divorced. Their 3 children, Lydia, Christopher, and Natalie, often find themselves in the crosshairs of explosive arguments. One of their central sources of conflict is how much time the children should or shouldn't spend at Daniel's house. It becomes such a sticking point that when he finds out Miranda is planning to hire a housekeeper to care for the children after school, he goes undercover, becoming the elderly Madam Doubtfire, and takes the job. Miranda has no idea, and hijinks ensue. When Daniel is eventually found out, the resulting battle seems like it will tear the family apart forever, but it may be exactly what the 2 parents need to begin behaving like adults.
All right, so that was alias Madam Doubtfire, or Madam Doubtfire as it is known to varying degrees in different places, as we've learned. All right, so Mrs. Doubtfire, the 1993 film. Daniel Hillard is a voice actor, a happy-go-lucky, sort of reckless, all about having fun, free-spirited voice actor. He's married to
Miranda.
I wanted to say Melinda. Miranda Hillard. They've been married for about 14 years. They have 3 children together. Miranda is a sort of buttoned-up corporate type. She's very responsible. She has a lot going on, but is also just a reasonable human being, adult, unlike her husband. So there's been strain throughout of their marriage for a long time that culminates when Robin Williams throws a giant, ridiculous party for his son, or for their son, even though they agreed that they would not have a party. This is the final straw, and they get a divorce. The courts rule that Robin Williams can only see, or Daniel Hillard, Robin Williams, can only see his kids once a week with supervised visits on Saturdays, and he, for all of his faults, he is a good father and does love his kids a lot, so he comes up with a plan to see them more often, because he knows that Miranda's going to hire a babysitter, essentially, a nanny, for the evenings. So he creates the character of Mrs. Doubtfire, where he dresses up as a woman in her probably late 60s, 70s, 80s, I don't know, an older woman, a British woman, and creates this character of Mrs. Doubtfire to become their nanny so he can spend time with them. Over the course of this, he learns a little bit about parenting and about responsibility and blah, blah, blah. And all the characters grow. Ultimately, it gets kind of spoiled. Everybody finds out. It culminates at a big dinner party. It is revealed that he is Mrs. Doubtfire. The courts take his kids away pretty much permanently. But then Miranda decides that, she sees what this has done to him and what he's gone through to try to be around with the kids. She hires him as the nanny, essentially, to take care of the kids in the evenings. And then the movie ends. So that's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it.
I mean, that's pretty much it. And it's lots of hijinks with that premise. So that is a summation of Alias Madame Doubtfire, Mrs. Doubtfire. Now let's get to the game show portion of our podcast and play Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
All right. I have 2 and 1 big gimme.
Okay, so Guess Who, just to clarify, or just a reminder for anybody who's new or doesn't know, Guess Who is the segment where, as I have not read the book, I don't know what the characters are like in the book, Katie is going to read character descriptions, and I'm going to try to match them and guess which character from the movie they coincide with. So, Katie.
All right.
Give me that first description.
She rose and moved across the window and stared out. Her hands thrust deep down into the pockets of her winter coat. It didn't really suit her. The pattern was too strong, and it made her look frumpish.
Well, there aren't that many female characters in the movie, barring the kids, which doesn't strike me. Oh, it could be the daughter. Yeah, probably not. I was going to say it could be the older daughter, but I mean, my guess would be that that's Miranda Hillard. That's my guess.
It is actually the older daughter. It's Lydia.
Oh, that was actually, as I thought about it, I was like, that might make sense. And she does, now everybody wears kind of baggy clothes in the movie because it's the 90s.
Right.
So that like sort of frumpish clothing look was just kind of everybody dressed that way, especially kids. But I thought that kind of made sense for her. But dang. Oh well, 0 for 1.
All right. She was dressed smartly from top to toe in glossy black and purest white. Her thick and luscious hair, piled high on her head, was held in place by one small and strategically placed diamante clip. In her 3-inch heels, she was taller than Daniel.
Okay, well, I'm trying to think of a female character. I mean, that sounds like it would have to be Miranda. Especially because she has like some sort of stylish hair clip, and with Miranda being in sort of the corporate, she's like a designer that fits, not like an interior designer. And I can't think of what other possible character that would be, so I'm gonna go for Miranda again.
It is Miranda.
Okay.
Yeah. She's portrayed as a little bit even more corporate in the book than she is in the movie. Okay. So, all right, here's your gimme, because I really wanted to read this description.
I assume I'm going to know which one this is.
This is one of a couple different descriptions of this character that appears in the book, but this is the initial one that we get. A vast apparition towered over her on the doorstep. It wore a loose salmon pink coat, beneath which hung boldly patterned skirts that hid all but a few inches of dark green rubber boots. Its head was swathed in a bulging turban held together with numerous safety pins and a glittery turquoise brooch. Coils of feathery scarf floated down its neck, and tucked under its arm was an enormous imitation handbag. Okay,
so this is Doubtfire.
Yeah.
It's interesting because this very much reads more like a character from like a Roald Dahl book, not Roald Dahl. Maybe that, like a more of a like not fantasy book, but like Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It read that description, the turban and the like boots, and it reads like a weird, like a Nanny McPhee character.
Yes,
like
absolutely.
You know what I mean? Whereas
it's a much more eccentric kind
Yeah.
of out there look than what we get in the movie.
which is a little strange, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, but that description's a little strange that Miranda would hire that person to me. Mm-hmm. Because that doesn't seem to fit in with what Miranda's looking for, whereas Mrs. Doubtfire, being sort of this prim and proper British nanny, very much fits in line with what Miranda, in the movie, what Miranda's looking for, with that stability and whatnot in a nanny. And as a juxtaposition to what Daniel Hillard, what Robin Williams' character provided in terms of the chaos and whatnot, this character looks, via description, much more chaotic than I would expect Miranda Hillard to want. But we could talk about how that, maybe her character's different or what, how that all plays out in the book, and we'll get there. But that is interesting. That is very different than the movie.
Yes, and I was kind of surprised rewatching the movie because I hadn't seen this movie since I was a kid. I was a little surprised that they didn't do a nod to that during the makeover
During the
scene.
montage?
Yeah.
And I was actually thinking about that, and you're right. I don't think they do. And that would have been an easy
That would have
one.
been an easy gimme for book readers, yeah.
Yeah. I think you're right. They don't. But they maybe they did at one point, and they scrapped it because not enough people would get it for the sake of just doing a bunch of celebrities, like the Barbara Streisand and, that sort of thing. They were like, well, the screen time will be better served making references people will get as opposed to references to the 8 people who read this book will get. Not to say it was 8 people, but it's based on our response of people who didn't know it was based on a book. It maybe less, not quite enough people would get it to make it worth it. But yeah.
But a turban and a feather boa would have been an interesting look.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Can we also talk about the problematic use of it throughout that?
Yeah.
Is that in reference, I guess, because the first line uses apparition?
It's in reference to the first line using apparition. It's not great.
I just thought it was a little strange.
But it doesn't continue
right. Okay,
through
fair
the
enough.
book. That's
fair
the
enough.
only place where it's done.
Okay, fair enough. Like I said, it is in reference to apparition, and so I got what was happening there. But yeah. All right. 2 for 3. One of those doesn't count because it was way too easy, but not too bad. Let's hit it. It's time for... Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
First up, in the movie, Robin Williams' character, Daniel Hillard, is a voice actor. Well, at least when we first see him.
Yes.
We assume he's had several jobs. She says he goes in between jobs pretty often, but he is a voice actor, which is fitting for Robin Williams, and I'm assuming that's probably why his character is a voice actor, because they get to do a bit with Robin Williams doing voices in the beginning of the movie and throughout the movie, honestly. And I thought it was interesting. So in the book, or in the movie, he's a voice actor, and he ends up quitting, essentially, because he refuses to peddle cigarettes to kids. Not peddle, but to do a cartoon where a character, smokes a cigarette.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to be part of that. And I was like, that's interesting. Is that why he loses his job in the book, or how does that play out?
No, he is an actor.
He is an actor.
He's an actor. He's not specifically a voice actor.
Right.
But he's just kind of perpetually out of work in the book. There's no scene where he specifically loses a
does
job.
some sort of moral
No.
grandstanding and ends up...
And won't be part of the big tobacco machine.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's not in the book.
Is the inciting incident for the divorce. Now that they established in the movie that there's been a lot building over the course of their relationship, which is as per usual for things like a divorce. It's not like an event usually, barring some outlandish thing. But the inciting incident in the movie is he has this giant party that is a truly irresponsible, house ruining petting zoo party.
Yes.
Is that what happens in the book? Is that the event that springs their divorce?
No.
Okay.
They're actually already divorced when the book starts.
Okay, so we don't get that.
Yeah, we don't get to see their divorce proceedings.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I like that in the movie. I guess we'll talk about it, but I do enjoy that. seeing, because it gives Daniel a better, both of them really. We get more of character growth and an arc for them, seeing where they're starting and where they end.
The 12-year-old rager is definitely a good way to kind of get a feel for both of their characters.
Yeah. Okay. In the movie, the way Daniel Hillard is able to become Mrs. Doubtfire is that he has a brother who is a special effects makeup artist. Mm-hmm. Him and his boyfriend in the movie, or husband. I guess they're not married because it's in California, so maybe they could be at the time. No,
well, they refer to them.
They say aunt and uncle.
They say uncle and then aunt.
Yeah, Jack or whatever. But I don't
think they ever actually say.
They could just call them that and not like actually have them be married. But anyways, his brother's a special effects makeup artist, which is how he is able to perform the transformation into Mrs. Doubtfire. Is that how he does this in the book, or is it basically just his own doing, and and people are stupid in the book?
The second one.
It's people
it's
are
his
stupid.
own doing, and people are
oblivious.
It's an interesting thing, yeah. There's no mention of him having any siblings in the book, and he literally just like cakes his face with makeup. There's no prosthetics or anything.
Like the thing is that you can transform your your visage pretty drastically with even just makeup.
Yes.
That being said, your family, I find it hard. Like
You would
maybe
think.
somebody who you know, a loose acquaintance or something, but like your kids and your ex-wife would be tough to, especially if you're just some dude who doesn't know how to do makeup. Like if he had, I guess he's an actor, maybe he's been around.
Yeah, he might know how to do some stuff.
Yeah, but even still,
but I don't know that he would know the intricacies of like contour.
Yeah, to the point to like transform your face enough for people not to recognize you. Because that seems hard to believe. Yeah. So we'll talk about it, but that seems like an interesting and smart choice that the movie made. Okay, so in the movie, we are introduced eventually to Pierce Brosnan playing Miranda Hillard's new love interest. Is there a James Bond love interest that swoops in the book? And does he just, because this is the twist I like about it. It's in the movie, you're uncertain for the beginning part of the introduction of Pierce Brosnan about whether or not he's going to be sort of the typical cliche.
Right.
Not creep, but like jerky, like cool guy who doesn't give a shit, and it's like maybe ends up being a creep, or maybe is just in it for her money, or maybe whatever thing. But the movie takes it the other direction. It turns out Pierce Brosnan is a pretty nice guy who just likes her,
he just likes
her, like. And so, because I think I had read that originally in the movie script he was supposed to be a jerk, and like or something, and that there was supposed to be more animosity, or
kind of a classic evil step parent archetype
type of thing. But they decided against it at some point, is what I read. So how does the book do that? How does the book play that out?
So in the book, Miranda is dating a guy named Sam.
Okay.
Which is a point of some consternation for Daniel, but we never actually meet Sam.
Okay. So, we have no idea if he's a good guy or a jerk, or
who knows,
or looks like James Bond or doesn't.
He could. I like to imagine he does.
Yeah. Yes. How does he come up with the name Miss Doubtfire? Because in the movie, she's like, "Oh, what was your name?" And he's like, "Oh, I thought he didn't realize he didn't give her his name." And in a moment of panic, he glances around the room and sees a newspaper, and it says, "Authorities doubt the fire was something."
Yeah. And
he just sees Doubtfire, puts it together. It's Doubtfire.
All right.
Do we get to find out how he comes up with that name in the book?
So that's not what happens in the book. There is an allusion in the book to Madame Doubtfire having been a long since past role that he had in a very avant-garde sounding play.
Okay.
But it's just like a brief mention, and there's never really any absolute confirmation that that's what it was.
Okay.
Like one of the kids thinks that they remember that being a thing that happened.
So we can assume that's probably the case.
Yeah, that's probably
maybe?
the case.
Yeah. Okay. This is a fun moment in the movie, and it was even more apparent to me now as an adult versus watching this as a kid. A lot of things in this movie were, but because I also I've seen this movie probably more recently than you, but not in its entirety.
Yeah.
more recently. I watched this movie a lot as a kid. I probably saw this movie a half dozen to a dozen times from 93 to 2000 or something like that. It's just one of those ones I just watched a lot, like we had on VHS or something, and I just watched it pretty often. So does in the movie, Daniel he takes the bus to and from Miranda's, and he gets awkwardly hit on numerous times by an elderly bus driver. Does this happen in the movie or in the book? Because in the movie, it's quite a nice moment of. I say nice. It's not nice. It's a fun turn of similar to how we discussed how what's her name wanted Warren Beatty, the author wanted Warren Beatty to play Mrs. Doubtfire because she wanted him to dress up as a woman because he's such a womanizer. Blah blah blah. Not to say this is about Robin Williams, but just the idea that like this guy having to live and experience being awkward and creepily hit on at night on a bus by some guy. Again, you know.
And not having any choice but to just sit there and
just
smile.
Be like, smile and clutch your bag a little tighter,
Actually, sort of.
Oh.
There is a somewhat but not really similar scene with the bus driver.
Yeah. So, but like, does he hit on her?
Yes.
Okay. How is it not really similar?
So in the movie, the bus driver sees his legs.
At one point, yeah.
At one point, he sees his leg, and the reaction is kind of like, "Oh, I like that."
Yeah.
In the book, the bus driver sees his arms, which are very masculine.
Yeah.
And kind of shuts up real quick.
Oh, okay.
So there's a different reaction there.
Okay. So in the movie, at some point, we get the fun back and forth with where the worker, the caseworker comes to inspect his apartment and see how he's doing and all that stuff, to check up on him. And she runs into Mrs. Doubtfire first, and he has to go back and forth between Mrs. Doubtfire and Daniel while she's there.
Right.
Does that happen in the book, or does he have a case? Does any of that happen in the book?
No, that scene isn't in the book at all.
Okay. Well, that's a spoiler for later, I guess. Maybe not. It could still happen in a different situation. But then in this instance, so he has to go back and forth, and his mask. And now this, you already answered this because he doesn't have a mask. He just puts makeup on. Okay. So then what my point was, or my question was, because he gets his face run over by a truck. Mm-hmm. And then has to improvise. So this is probably going to ruin all of these. But so it doesn't get run over by a truck. No. Following up on that, he then has to panic and come up with a solution to hide his face so that this caseworker doesn't realize that he is Mrs. Doubtfire. So he sticks his face in a cake in the icing to make it look like a mask, like a beauty mask or whatever. Yeah. Does that happen in the book?
No.
Okay.
No, none of that scene is in the book.
None of that's in the book. So it's all just okay. That's kind of what I expected. We talked a little bit in the prequel about that scene, and that like parts of that for sure were improvised because like the icing dripping off his face was not supposed to happen, but under the heat of the lights it happened, and then so they went along with it and did the whole tea thing, which is funny in the movie. And we'll talk about this more later, but did the kids find out? Do the kids ever find out that it's him until like the end, or do they ever? Do they ever kind of figure out that
the two older kids always know it's him?
They always know.
They know it's him from the beginning.
Okay, so that's very different then.
I mean, technically, all three kids know, but the youngest one like compartmentalizes and never acknowledges that it's him, and they just let her do it, which is kind of disturbing.
Interesting.
But yeah, the two kids are the three kids, but the two kids, older kids, always know it's him.
So are they not fooled, or does he tell them?
They are not fooled.
Okay, but Miranda is.
Yes.
Weird.
This is a classic, like, kids lit thing.
Right.
Children are smart,
right.
Adults are idiots.
Okay, yeah. It's like Lemony Snicket.
Keep in mind here, too, remember I said this was satire.
Right. Did you ever figure out what this is satirizing?
I think it's satirizing adults.
Okay.
And adults who are maybe divorced in particular.
Yeah. It's interesting because the movie, I think, goes a different direction.
Yeah.
It is not satirizing people that are divorced. It's very much a sort of a loving exploration of sort of quote unquote broken households. It's not probably the best term for it, but okay, so the kids just know the whole time.
Yes.
And the second part of that was they figured out in the movie because he pees standing up, and we'll discuss that more later. The run by fruiting, maybe the most well-known scene in the entire movie, because it is one of the funniest scenes in the whole movie. Is Robin Williams in a fit of rage throws a lime at the back of Pierce Brosnan's head, and then plays it off by saying it was a run by fruiting or drive by fruiting. Is there a drive by fruiting?
No, that scene doesn't happen.
That feels like a Robin Williams made that up on the spot type of thing. Like, or at least the line feels like maybe they had it like he throws a lime at Pierce Brosnan, and then they're like, Robin Williams come up with 20 different like lines in response to that, and they went with that one. All right, no run by fruiting in the book. So in the movie, the big third act back and forth, the big sort of climax of the film is he has this job interview, quote unquote, kind of thing with the boss at his temporary / part-time job, where he's going to pitch him TV shows, basically. Yes.
This is the part of the movie where it becomes a Shakespearean comedy.
Right. And then at the same time, he's at dinner with Miranda and the new boy, Pierce Brosnan, and the kids celebrating her birthday. And he has to go, and he's with the family as Mrs. Doubtfire, and he's with the boss as Daniel Hillard. And he has to go back and forth and change in the bathroom a million times. And it's the hijinks and the back and forth, and he forgets and ends up at the wrong tables, the wrong person. Classic slapstick hijinks. Does any of that happen in the book?
Not really. He is discovered through somewhat similar hijinks. Okay. Where he's trying to be two people in the same place.
Oh, so it is similar.
And going back and forth very quickly, but it's not at a restaurant, and it's not nearly as interesting and funny. Okay.
But so is it well, I guess we can talk about it because I have another follow-up question here in just a second, so we'll get to that. Is the big reveal that is he revealed because he has to do the Heimlich maneuver and rips his... Well, he doesn't have prosthetics on, but his wig could fall off or his turban could fall off or something, maybe revealing it if he's doing the Heimlich maneuver on somebody.
He's not doing the Heimlich maneuver, but his turban does come unraveled.
Oh, and that is part of what reveals him.
Yeah. Okay. He's trying to like wrap it up, but he can't do a very good job.
And so it's just like but it doesn't come over. It's not some big outland. There's not something crazy happening that makes it his reveal occur. It just kind of
It just kind of all falls apart.
It just dishevels and kind of yeah. Gotcha. In the movie, ultimately, Mrs. Doubtfire again, he works at this TV station and. He ends up getting into an interview with the boss, who's seen him kind of playing around on the set and thinks he's funny and is like, hey, you got good ideas for kids programming. You should come talk to me about it. And ultimately pitches Mrs. Doubtfire as a character on accident initially, but then goes with it, and that becomes the new show. And Mrs. Doubtfire is like it's kind of like a Mr. Rogers type thing. So, does Mrs. Doubtfire get her own TV show?
She does not. No.
It makes sense because he was an actor, so I thought there was potential there.
There was potential for that, but no, that's not how it plays out.
Okay. And then finally, in the movie, there is no happy ending. I mean, there is, but it's not a happy ending that you might typically expect in that Daniel and Miranda Hillard stay super divorced. They don't get back together. They don't, they don't reunite. They just sort of come to a new normal and stay divorced. Is that what happens in the book?
I can confirm that they stay very much divorced in the book. Yes.
All right. So no happy ending in the movie. Or well, again, I say happy ending. It's still a happy ending. What I mean is like your sort of typical Hollywood type of happy ending.
Right, it's not they fall back in love and get back together whatever. Kind of a happy ending. It's a more realistic
happy ending. Yeah, and I don't mean to imply that being divorced is not a happy ending. We'll talk about it more later. In fact, I think quite the opposite can be the case. I just was sort of speaking more to your typical idea,
Right, your typical idea of they fall in love and kiss and ride off in the sunset or whatever.
Yes. So none of that. Cool. No. I was hoping not. Because like I said, I like that they stay divorced, and we'll talk about it more in a minute. But first, we have a little bit of a lost in adaptation. I didn't have anything, but Katie was confused.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
All right, so in the movie, when he takes she's gonna place the advertisement for the nanny, and he takes the ad and he's looking at it.
Yeah.
And then he quickly changes the 2 numbers on the ad. And I made a comment to you.
Yeah.
I was like, it's a good thing their phone numbers are only 2 digits off from each other. And you looked at me like you had no idea what I was talking about. And in that moment, I realized that thanks to the book, I had completely and totally misunderstood the scene.
Yeah.
Because in the book, he does change it to his number.
Right.
He like whites it out and changes it to his number. So that's what I was thinking when he changed it in the movie.
Yeah. No, I think, and I could be wrong. This always confused me as a kid. I didn't really get what he was doing when I was little because I just wasn't sure. Like, it's pretty brief and like you don't really see the entire thing. And I didn't really. I also didn't understand the idea of like print ads and like how that worked and whatever. So what I think at least what's happening in that scene is he's not changing the number to his number. He's just changing it to any like a random nonsense number by like changing 2 of the numbers so that anybody who calls once the ad's printed, they won't actually get her. And he'll be the only one that's able to call her because he knows her number.
He changes like a 1 to a 4 and a 3 to an 8 or something like that. And I'm sitting over there thinking like, well, that's really convenient. It's just 2 numbers off. Yeah. And they were both easily changed.
Yeah, I get your confusion. I do understand your confusion there, especially because, like you said, from the book. But I also don't get that in the book because why would he want it to be his number? Why does he
I don't know because nothing ever comes of it. They don't ever talk about, like, people calling him.
That's what I mean. Like, there's no reason for it to be his number.
No,
like,
there's not.
It doesn't help him in any way. He just wants them not to be able to, so she doesn't hire somebody else. So, yeah. But I get why you were confused by it because it's not super obvious and it's pretty quick and little. Like I said, little me didn't understand it at all. Adult me got it a little better, but I wasn't confused by the book. So there we go. You're unlost. Let's talk about what was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
Okay, so I mentioned that when the book starts off, they're already divorced. They've been divorced for a while.
Yeah.
And I think for the way that the movie explores the issue of divorce, the way the movie handles it is good.
Yeah.
But I also felt like the movie kind of, because they did it that way, it initially sets her up as more of the bad guy, whereas the book sets them both up as both kind of equally awful and responsible.
Yeah. Now, see, I would agree with that to some extent. I agree in the regard that to maybe kids watching the movie, as it is sort of a kid's movie. It's a family movie, but
right.
I think kids might watch that and see her as the bad guy because kids are stupid. And what I mean by that is that kids don't like. She's the stern one. She's
the bad cop to his good cop.
Right. But I think any sane adult watching this movie, or any sort of rational adult watching the movie, and this is how I felt this time, was like, I thought they actually did a fairly good job of not presenting her as too much of the bad guy in the situation. I completely was understood why she was so exasperated. They I think the movie actually struck a pretty good balance of flaws in both of them, while obviously are sort of I guess the biggest thing is that in terms of I understood why they were divorced. I think what the movie does is it, and I can see that, and this might be more what you're talking about, is as opposed to who's the villain and why they're divorced, the movie kind of keeps it even, I feel like. Whereas she comes across a bit as a villain in the movie because she quote unquote takes his kids away from him. And now she doesn't necessarily do that. The court says, look, you don't have a job, you don't have a place of residence. Like, but it could still, you could look at it that way, I guess. Again, I didn't. I actually thought that the movie did a fairly good job of. I did not remotely, and now maybe I'm more rational than some people are. Like more, I don't know, but like I did not actually see her as at all.
I don't necessarily
bad,
disagree
quote,
with
unquote.
you, and I do think that as the movie progresses, the portrayal of each of them becomes more balanced. But I did think that at least initially, like the scene when she's like marching in and shutting down the party, I thought it kind of maybe contributed to kind of a negative narrative about like women or about mothers.
Right. I agree the fact that is a trope to some extent, and that it does play into that. It's just for me, like I was like, yeah, that like it's you know, if it would have been one thing, and maybe this is just me, it still plays into it, but it would play into it way more in a way more harmful way for me if that was not this completely outrageous party.
Right.
Like if it was just like kids there and was like a bit like, you know what I mean? There's like this is like a fucking zoo and the police are like it is to the point where her coming in and being like, what the fuck is going on, and turning everything off is like a reasonable, you know what I mean? It's not like a you're being a bitch moment. It's like, what the hell is happening? Like this man's acting like a child. Like it's, at least to me, and now other people might not see it the way, and other people may not kind of come down the same way I would, of being like on her side in that instance, but and so I can see it being sort of weird or problematic and sort of reinforcing like a negative stereotype kind of thing or cliche. But for me, I was like, yeah, what is wrong with him? Yeah.
Okay. I mentioned that in the book, the kids know that it's him. The two older kids definitely know that it's him, like immediately.
Yeah.
The younger one, it's maybe a little more questionable. She's also very young. And I feel like that makes more sense.
Yeah.
Like they would know, right?
In the book, they would. In the sense that he just puts makeup on.
Yeah.
And puts a turban on. In the movie, I don't know if you would. Like, that portrayal, the different, like, the transformation Robin Williams goes through, the voice, the prosthetics, I'm not sure.
What about his eyes, though? I mean, wouldn't you know your father's eyes?
Probably, but it's also so outlandish.
Yeah.
And it is enough of a transformation, and it looks enough like a real person, whereas if somebody in galoshes and a turban that looked vaguely like my dad showed up, I'd be like, yeah, what the fuck? But like this like little old British lady who looks like very different, like, I don't know. I'm not... I agree that in the book it totally makes sense that they, like, based on the book description, of course they would, and how the transformation goes, of course they would realize. The movie, I still think they probably would, but like less potentially. I don't know.
I feel like though there's also the factor of like they're spending a lot of time with him as Mrs. Doubtfire,
right?
So wouldn't you eventually figure it out or realize?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
they do in
maybe
the movie,
if you're
but
not looking for it, but
yeah, that was my thought. That you might, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things that's kind of impossible to like percentage. Like, what are the chances they'd figure it out versus wouldn't? It's such a weird situation that it would be pretty hard.
Yeah, it's hard to really parse and like know. I don't know. I just feel like even if my mom like put on prosthetics and a wig and everything, if I was like spending a bunch of time every day with her, I feel like eventually I'd be like, wait a minute.
But if your mom, your mom, but your mom's not Robin Williams.
And
I mean that like in the sense of like how talented and I mean like, because we're basically Daniel Hillard's playing Robin Williams, essentially, like a less successful Robin Williams in the movie. And so, like, the idea is, like, he truly... I mean, because I have a note about it later, but it is truly wild. Like, his voice is so different.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't sound anything like Robin Williams. And, like, they I don't know. I think, the eyes are the only real thing. But even that, I don't know. I don't know if you would, honestly. I don't know if you would.
All right.
But I could be wrong. I don't know.
Okay. So one of the character traits that the book gives Daniel is that he's really good at gardening and like taking care of plants, which is a little thing. It's not terribly important. But I do think it was kind of an interesting character trait, and it does help sell him as a little old lady.
It's true. That's true.
Yeah.
He has no, which is where part of the humor comes from, but he has he has no little old lady traits other than he can act like one.
And all the neighbors start asking him for advice with their gardens too, and none of the neighbors realize it's him either.
That's interesting.
So,
but see, that would be a giveaway too.
you would think.
That's what I mean in the book, which it does. Well, I don't know if that's how they just figured out from being around him, but like that would be a giveaway to I feel like that would be more of a giveaway to other people too. Is like if he had like skills and hobbies in common, like that's more of a giveaway. Whereas the movie doesn't have that, other than like the soccer thing, kind of. But he only does that around the kids, I think, after they know, so it's not like that big of a deal. But
all right. So I mentioned that the scene during which he is uncovered as being Mrs. Doubtfire, was not. It's similar to what happens in the movie, but it's not the same. And I don't think that it would have played well in the movie, and I think that what the movie did was ultimately better. But I do think that what happens in the book is conceptually funnier.
okay,
So what happens in the book is that he has a part-time job at the local college, nude modeling for art classes.
Oh, okay.
So what happens is that through a series of mishaps, the art class ends up having to meet at Miranda's house while he's supposed to be there as Mrs. Doubtfire.
That is a weird.
So,
yeah,
like
no,
I said,
there's humor to be had there.
There's humor to be had there. I think it's like maybe conceptually funnier.
Yeah.
But I think what the movie does with it versus what the book does with it in terms of like hijinks is funnier.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely comedic wheat to be reaped there. But yeah, I think with making Stu a more integral character.
Yes.
And I like the whole storyline with Mrs. Doubtfire getting a show sort of thing. The direction they take the movie makes a lot of sense. And obviously in that regard, the nude modeling wouldn't fit into that at all.
Yeah.
But there's definitely potential humor to be had there. But all right, that's it for Better in the Book. Let's do Better in the Movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
The giant birthday party at the beginning we talked about. I do think it's a great way to show his character. Shows how like kind of chaotic and irresponsible he can be.
Yeah.
What a potential nightmare it would be to have to live with him as an adult and not a child. Talked a little bit about this, having them be in the midst of a divorce and him fighting to be with his children kind of raises the stakes.
Yeah.
I think it provides a solider reason for him to become Mrs. Doubtfire. But it also, I think, makes it a wildly stupider thing to do.
Yeah. So in the movie, he just doesn't have custody. It's not like a because in the movie, or sorry, in the book, in the movie, it's like a trial. He's like they're like, we'll reevaluate in 90 days, in 3 months. And at that point, if you have a job, if you have all these things, maybe you'll we'll do joint custody or whatever.
Yeah.
But in the book, you're saying he just doesn't have.
Well,
custody.
they have joint custody technically,
okay,
but he doesn't get to see them nearly as much as they're at their mom's.
Right.
And she has this penchant for bringing them late and picking them up early, which frustrates him.
Gotcha.
So when he finds out that she's hiring a housekeeper, he kind of just hatches this plot.
Yes. So you're in that regard, you're right. It definitely raises stakes, but it is which is why, because it's a much stupider thing to do in the movie, it does raise the stakes. And we'll talk more about that later. But yeah, it's a wildly stupid thing to do in the movie.
Yeah, you're running a huge risk.
Yeah. Which does end up blowing up in his face.
Yeah, and it does.
Yeah.
I like how he comes up with the name Doubtfire in the movie better. I feel like the book's explanation is odd.
What was the book's explanation?
That it was like a character he played a long time ago, and it seems like another thing that could get him caught. So
yeah.
Like if she happened to remember that.
Oh yeah, that was the character when we first met or something. Yeah, that's weird.
I like that they did more with the makeup in general. Giving him a special effects brother was convenient, perhaps. Yeah, a little convenient. But he lives in San Francisco. Yeah. So it's a little, kind of makes a little more sense that they're nearish LA. They're in a place where the land of movies.
Yeah, they're in a place where there are people where that job's a little more common than they say. Which originally they were going to, and I think I left this out in the prequel episode, that they were scouting and were planning on shooting this. It was going to be set in Chicago, which that would make it a little more. Not impossible, but just a little more strange.
Just ever so slightly less believable.
That his brother is like a super talented special effects makeup artist. Again, they're all over the place, but it just kind of makes sense.
But then he's also working as like a voiceover artist.
Yeah, and, all of those things don't make as much sense set somewhere like Chicago. Yeah. Again, not that they don't make sense. But.
I also love a good makeover montage.
Yeah.
So that's probably one of my favorite movie tropes is the makeover montage.
And you get to do, again, in the movie, it's just celebrities. Not just celebrities, but mostly celebrities. Yeah. And outdated racial stereotypes. It's not too bad in that regard. But I mean, it's not great, but it's also like...
On the scale of how awful it could be.
Yes. Yes. On the scale of how bad it could be, it's not so bad.
It's not so bad. There is a lot more like back and forth comedy and hijinks in the movie that's just not in the book.
Yeah, I think a lot of that arises from Robin Williams' improv and that sort of thing. There's one, I forgot, what was that one line? I laughed for so long. Shit, I'm not going to be able to remember it now. I'm going to be mad that I even brought it up. There was one line, and it was like a throwaway line Robin Williams had, and it was so funny. And now I'm not going to be able to remember it. This is pointless. Dang it.
Sorry, everyone.
It's something funny he said. There you go.
Just think of your favorite funny line from Mrs. Doubtfire.
It was that one. That was the one I was thinking of.
I like that the movie shows him like struggling to cook.
Yeah.
In the book, it doesn't come up. He just like goes there and cooks for the kids.
Yeah.
But it makes sense that he'd struggle because he's still the same type of like let's order takeout kind of guy in both the book and the movie.
But in the book, he just manages to cook. And that's part of his growth in the movie is that he can't do it at first, and then studies and learns and watches Julia Child and then knows how to cook. But he is, and I know it's for comedic effect, but he is. I find it hard, and I'm even saying this. I'm sure there are people this way, but. I guess it's because I've learned to cook at a relatively young age. It astounds me that there would be people who are so inept at cooking that they like literally don't understand anything about it. Like they don't understand that like all of it, everything is burning all at once. He's burning like boiled water. Like he's like burning water somehow. Like it's all just like he grabs a boiling pot with his bare, like it's just. And again, I know it's played up for comedic effect, but. There's got to be some sort of level of truth to that, and it's just kind of weird to me. And I know it's true. It's just weird. I guess I'm just lucky in the sense that my parents taught me to cook when I was young, so it just sort of like.
I actually feel like if you don't know what you're doing, turning up the heat really high is a logical error to make.
See, that's wild to me. I guess to me, it's almost like the opposite,
and it cooks faster.
Right, but
I didn't say it was a good piece of logic.
Yeah,
but it is a piece of logic.
Fair enough. That's fair. But yeah, that scene was always to me. It's just like, dude. Also, start easier. Maybe don't try to make lobster thermidor for your first fucking meal that you're learning to cook. Like,
Yeah,
let's go.
maybe not a cheese sauce.
Yeah, let's not make hollandaise and lobster thermidor for your... I don't know if he's actually making lobster thermidor. He's making some sort of shell. Well, he does make lobster at one point, but the first one, I don't. He's making like fish or steak
I don't know. It looked like
because it's burnt something
like
in a
short
pan.
ribs almost.
Yeah, it looked like some sort of meat that was burnt.
Maybe start with like a nice meatloaf or like pasta.
Yeah, so many things. Yeah, pasta's perfect.
Yeah,
unless you just boil the shit out of it or not, you're fine. But, yeah, I don't.
And my last note on Better in the Movie is that the movie has Robin Williams, so there's that.
Yeah, the book cannot have Robin Williams. So. All right, that was it for Better in the Movie. Now let's, it's very brief, but we have two things that the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
It's two things that are, I could lump them into one thing, honestly, because it's all the same scene.
Yes, it is all the same scene.
There is a point where the kids are at his apartment not long after he moves in, and they're having Chinese takeout, and he makes a joke about Miranda getting amoebic dysentery, which upsets the youngest daughter.
Yeah.
And then she pulls up outside and is honking and then busts her way in through the door.
Yeah.
And of course he gets upset because she dropped them off late and now here she is picking them up early, and that scene is like beat for beat, word for word from the book.
There you go.
It's pretty much the only thing.
It's interesting because
beat for beat, word for word.
Yeah.
But
it's funny you mentioned that because you said the movie overall is like funnier and a little more like it's not the same sort of satire, and like the book sounds a little more like I don't want to say darker, but like
it's a specific type of humor, I think.
Yeah. And that scene felt the most. It's the one scene. It's like the only scene. Well, I guess like the court scenes are pretty similar that are like really like kind of sad or brutal, and like that scene in particular where he starts yelling at him to like sit down and it's like it hits like it's one of those scenes. It's one of those scenes in the movie that's like not funny really. Even like the part with the like amoebic dysentery part is, but even that's sort of like a dark kind of weird humor, and like the little girl like I don't want mommy to die, and they're like like it's still funny, but it's not the same Robin Williams funny of like. I mean, now there's still moments of that interspersed where he's doing like voices and stuff, but.
It's not the same kind of goofy hijinks type of...
It does stand out, I think, amongst the rest of the movie as being a slightly different type of thing going on there.
Yeah,
a slightly different tone.
The book does... It's a very different tone than the movie. There are still funny parts, but it is a darker-ish kind of humor. It's a very specific type of humor. And I think part of, at least for me, what makes the book a little bit less funny than the movie is that both of the parents are just the worst.
Yeah.
Like, both of them are so awful.
Yeah.
Like, it's just, ugh. Like, it's hard to read sometimes.
Yeah.
Because you want to like reach into the book and throttle both of them in turn. They're so horrible.
Yeah, and that's where the movie goes completely different. Because it's going for a message, a happier message. Yeah, and they're actually they're both good parents in their own way. They just have their flaws.
The movie very much softens both of their characters.
Yeah. All right, we have a few odds and ends before we get to the final verdict. All right, so we have a lot to talk about here. I'm going to do my things first, then we got a big little section to get out of, to get into here. So I just had a few little notes. This is a stupid thing, but I think Sally Field and Robin Williams are a good look match. Yeah. Because and the only reason I bring it up is that Robin Williams looks like Robin Williams, and I was like very glad that they didn't get like some like way younger, way prettier actress to play
Yeah,
his wife. They look like a reasonable couple.
Together.
They are believable looking people, and they make sense together. Like in terms of like they're both attractive, but not like movie star attractive people. Like I don't know. It's like, oh yeah, those look like normal people that would be in a relationship.
It is especially refreshing given, I think, the tendency of comedies, and this is more of a thing in TV than movies, I think, but to cast like
that's what I was saying.
A kind of schlubby looking guy with like a model.
Right. Yeah. Like the King of Queens thing. Like,
and you're like looking at him like, I don't want to be that person to say this doesn't make sense, but this doesn't make sense.
And not to, and again, that's a bit, it's shallow. And I'm not, I think we're both speaking more to the sort of the weird problematic nature of the sort of male gaziness of it, as opposed to like, you're a 7 out of 10, you're a 9 out of 10, you don't belong together. It's not that. It's that it's almost always, or at least traditionally been always the female character who's like looks like a model or an and then it's like the stand-in for the audience guy who's just like a schlubby guy, So yeah, I think just to clarify, it's more about the sort of male gaziness of it than you're not a perfect match for each other or whatever physically. Like, that's nonsense. Love whoever
But Robin
you love.
Williams and Sally Field look like a couple that you would encounter in real life.
That was my point. Yeah, they make sense. I also think this movie is rewatching it a pretty masterful character piece, especially for a family children's movie. I think it handles it very deftly. Their Daniel's flaws and his good qualities are super obvious, and again, for a kids movie, I think this is important because I think a kid would watch this and kind of get it.
Yeah.
It's a little maybe too obvious for like if this was like a serious drama for like Oscar consideration, like maybe it's the flaws and the good qualities of Miranda and Daniel Hillard are a little too like arch, a little too obvious, maybe. But I think it works really well for a kids movie. And we find out everything we need to know about Daniel Hillard in the first 15 minutes of the movie, about why, the things that make him good. He's morally, he's got a good moral compass. Like when he decides he doesn't want to do the cigarette thing, and so much so that he's like, look, I'm not going to do this. And he walks out on the job. And he truly loves his kids. We see that, and he picks them up, and they all love him, and they have a very good relationship back and forth. But then we get, also he's wildly irresponsible. He's going to have this ridiculous party. It just sets up everything. And they're back and forth, and their relationship feels very believable. And little moments and little lines of dialogue where it's one throwaway line, but while they're fighting after the party, he says, "Oh, you became those corporate suits you always hated," or something like that. So you see how maybe you don't see any of it, but you get this nugget of their previous relationship and how they used to be, and that she was maybe a little more kind of loose
you
and
get
free.
this inkling of how their relationship has progressed over the last 14 years.
Yeah, and how it has changed.
Yeah.
And how they haven't changed together and why they have grown apart. Because she's changed more than him, maybe in some ways, and probably for the better because he's irresponsible. But anyways, it's just really, really well done. And I mentioned it earlier, but Robin Williams' voice as Mrs. Doubtfire is wild to me. It doesn't sound anything like him. I mean, he does a million voices, but little thing, how is James Bond allergic to pepper and how is he alive? Literally, pepper is in everything. And now in the... Right? He says, I'm allergic to pepper.
Right. It doesn't get any more specific than that.
He just says, I'm allergic to pepper. I'm like, bro, you can't eat anywhere. Every recipe I've ever made has some form of pepper.
Yeah.
Literally every recipe I have ever made, other than like pancakes, has had pepper in it. What are you talking about? And now we see in the particular scene what Robin Williams dumps like cayenne pepper all over the dish, which would make a little more like, because that's not something that's in everything at least. Whereas like pepper.
It's a specific type of pepper.
Right. Vague pepper, quote unquote. And now he did order, but even still, no. Yeah, it's.
Well, why would you order the spiciest thing?
Right.
And then he orders like jambalaya.
Or whatever.
Like, bro, you're not getting that with no pepper.
Yeah. You're not getting anything with no pepper. You can't. put pepper in everything. Salt and pepper is like in everything. It's blowing my mind. I mean, it's not in everything, but like you go to a restaurant, like 90, whatever. Okay. Literally every recipe.
All right, but you're especially not getting a spicy Cajun stew with no pepper.
Yeah, exactly. And then my last little note was that I thought this movie had a really nice divorce message. The family monologue at the end that Mrs. Doubtfire gives is really great, and we'll talk about it a little bit more here in a second. But I thought just overall it's really sweet, well written, good message about divorce and family and finding, and that family isn't just your mom and your dad living together in a house together with you. It can be many different things. Yeah. So I thought that was nice.
All right, I have a couple notes before we get into our kind of meatier topic. Okay, so the cartoon cigarette thing. Totally get that that's setting up his character. But cartoon hawking cigarettes, would that have even been an issue in the 90s?
You mean it feels more like a 70s or 80s thing?
It feels more like, it feels more like an older thing than...
Probably. And now again, and I kind of said it wrong. They're not like selling cigarettes. It's just a character who is smoking a cigarette in the thing, which is a little more likely, I think, still at the time. But it does feel, and the style of animation and stuff, it feels like an older cartoon, like an older Looney Tunes cartoon, where that would have been more of a problem. Whereas this being like the 90s or whatever, a little less likely, but... Yeah, still, I'm not that I say it wouldn't. I think it still definitely could happen. It's just we're just around the time where we're coming around to the fact that cigarettes are the worst and like shouldn't be advertising them to anybody, let alone kids.
I liked that even before they got divorced, when Miranda found out that Stu had called her, she was like, thank you, next. She was ready to go.
Yeah, she's already done. She was like, James Bond wants to see me? Okay. I will talk to James Bond.
We paused the movie actually to discuss this a little bit at length. I feel like the mobile petting zoo wouldn't just let their animals wander up and down the street.
No.
In San Francisco.
They literally get there with that trailer, open it up, and they're just like, be
animals
free.
Everywhere.
Be free. And they just go everywhere. It's pretty much nonsense.
A moment that it's funny, but it was also kind of weird.
Yeah.
After Daniel saves James Bond's life and he's revealed as Mrs. Doubtfire, they like just shake hands.
They very quickly and like, sir, and like just kind of briefly shake hands and look at each other and like,
It's funny, but it's also so weird to me. But I guess like, what else could you do in that moment? What do you do?
No reaction. And the guy did just save his life, and he doesn't know necessarily that he was the one who put the pepper on his thing.
It's true.
So he's just like, I guess I got to shake your hand. You did just save me. So
I just want to talk for like a brief minute about how 90s wholesome this movie is.
Yeah.
It's so like, why was everything an after school special in the 90s?
It's because that's when that became a thing, right? Or maybe the 80s, but...
that's starting in the 80s, like leading into the 90s. And then like divorce as like a hot button topical issue is super 90s. And it's understandable because I think it had just recently started to become something that was like okay to talk about, and yet it wasn't going to be like so much of an issue that it would upset people.
Yeah.
But like just today, it seems so wrung out and discussed just to death.
It's one of those things that is aged in the same way that a lot of the stuff in those movies does. Is at the time that might even be seen as slightly progressive, not like wildly. It's the 90s. It's not 1950, but like a little bit, to the sense of just sort of talk so bluntly about divorce and kind of like there's some especially because like way more conservative type opinions on divorce, even now, are still very much against it or feel like it, whatever. And so there's something there to it, but it's definitely not sort of an interesting topic anymore. For most people.
It hardly feels like the kind of like issue that media from the time makes it out to be.
No.
But let's talk about something that is an issue.
Yes, indeed.
And let's dig in.
We'll dig in. Strap in. Content warning, transphobia, maybe?
Yeah.
I mean, there were to briefly discuss some of
the transphobia
Yeah.
in this movie. Maybe not as much as I might have guessed, given the time period and the subject matter.
I was pleasantly surprised, and I say that as, caveated as possible. I was expecting way worse, I guess we shall say, than we got. But
so I want to start with a disclaimer.
Yeah.
I have these examples here, but I don't think we need to list them. Okay, so our disclaimer, neither of us are authorities on this topic. Far from it.
Very much not.
This is not an issue that either of us live with or deal with. We're going to talk about it as it pertains to this movie and book because we feel like it's harmful to ignore it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But our intention is only to add to the conversation and not to talk over anyone.
Not to talk over anyone or have it anybody feel like we're saying our opinion is the end all be all or even interesting to people. Like it is truly just our feelings on the matter and our discussion on the matter. And it is trying to add to the conversation as opposed to dominate the conversation.
Right. But as we've kind of brought up with Harry Potter, we don't feel like it's beneficial to ignore this type of thing in media. So.
No, I think it'd be much more harmful, and you could convince me otherwise, but to not discuss it at all on this episode because we don't have we don't have the proper sort of framework and lived experience to really dig into it. I think it would be more harmful to ignore it than to discuss it in whatever way we can while sort of reaching out to other people to continue that discussion. Yeah.
So to that end, then we want to encourage everyone not to stop with what we have to say here and to seek out transgender creators. I want to specifically recommend the podcast, the Public Trans podcast. And we really like the YouTuber ContraPoints.
Yes, we're both big fans. We watch her content a lot. I will preface this, and probably a lot of people who might know, Contra's might not be for everybody. Most of LeftTube, and LeftTube is a thing, quote unquote, LeftTube. Is the sort of liberal's not the right word. The left side of YouTube, the lefty side of YouTube, likes Contra, but there is a tiny minority of people who find some of her content problematic, and I don't necessarily agree, but they have their own reasons that are understandable at times, and I just want to put that out there and not like wholly endorse. I will wholly endorse ContraPoints. I think she's brilliant, but I also don't have the lived experience to look at everything she says and go, there's nothing problematic about that. Whereas other trans people have watched her content and said, I don't like this. Right. And that's a more interesting perspective than my perspective.
Public Trans Podcast and ContraPoints, these are two things that we like. Yeah. You might not, and that's totally fine. If anybody has any other recommendations, I would love to hear them. Absolutely. Personally.
Yeah. Because especially with ContraPoints is so huge that it's us recommending her is like, okay, sure, everybody already watches Contra, but
okay, so this is really a movie about cross-dressing.
Yeah, the first thing. All this discussion of transphobia. This movie is not about trans.
This movie is about cross-dressing. Robin Williams' character is not trans. No. He's not transitioning. Mrs. Doubtfire is not an authentic self that he's trying to live as. And cross-dressing has a long history in entertainment. Yep. It's been a thing for as long as theater has been a thing, and it stretches back even further into folklore and mythology. Yep. I mentioned Shakespeare briefly earlier, and that's a big thing. Yeah.
There's also probably more problematic and less problematic versions of cross-dressing. Yes. Whereas, you know, you go to something like Shakespeare, the reason a lot of that happened was because, at least from my understanding, and I could be wrong with this, right, that they just didn't want women as part of the, or that for whatever reason women weren't included in theater. So in order to play those roles, they had to have men do it, and there's, you know, some sort of inherent misogyny going on there. Then there's probably also other versions that are less problematic than that of cross-dress. It's a complicated topic, but yeah.
It's a complicated topic.
It is an old topic.
But it does have a long history in entertainment. And there's obviously nothing inherently negative about cross-dressing.
No, because gender is a construct.
Yes. So the problematic elements that we want to discuss here aren't in the topic itself. It's in how they're presented.
Yeah.
And the presentation is not always great.
No, it's not.
Okay, so most of the problematic elements here, I think, are jokes at the expense of transgender people. And a lot of them are quick, like the line that he says on the phone.
Yeah.
He says at one point when he's calling Miranda, trying to be
he's doing a fake.
Yeah, he's doing a fake voice. He's pretending to be
a different applicant.
And he says like, I don't work with boys because I used to be one.
And she freaks out about that.
Yeah.
It's like, ugh. Yeah.
So there's stuff like that, and then there's stuff that you might not even really notice if you aren't aware of this kind of issues.
Yeah.
For example, the use of Aerosmith's "Dude looks like a lady."
Yeah, which I don't know the context of that song. I don't know what that song's actually about. If it's just about like a pretty like man, like there's I don't know. There could be a less problematic reading of what that song's about.
There could be, but I don't
it sounds
know.
Just by just by the chorus. Yeah, it sounds rough.
I love it. The chorus, which has been stuck in my head for the last 24 hours since we watched the movie. So thanks for that. All right, so there's stuff like that. To me, the most kind of problematic, did not age well scene is when Christopher, the son, catches Mrs. Doubtfire going to the bathroom while standing up.
Yeah.
So that's the way that's revealed to the kids.
Yeah.
And I think what makes it an issue is the reaction that they have.
Yeah.
There's like an immediate threat to call the cops.
Yes. It's so complicated, but yeah.
Yeah. Like an immediate threat to call the cops, like to me, as if this person isn't someone who has become their friend.
Right. And that this one thing is, but I don't, sorry.
And we're going to talk about like looking at media in the context of
right. That's where
time.
I was jumping to, and
but to me, I think it rings especially icky right now in 2019 in light of recent like bathroom bill legislation and the related false narrative that trans women who want to use the women's room are predators or perverts.
Yeah. It definitely feels absolutely in line with that mentality. Yes. And again, it's a little complicated because it's kids who don't really even know how to react. Like, it's different than adult. It's all contextually very kind of complicated, but I agree. It absolutely fits into that and falls into that problematic narrative.
And I think what's a little bit frustrating about media like this is that if you're really insistent on not like kind of facing up to that and thinking about, well, this kind of is potentially problematic. It's easy to hand wave it away.
Yeah, like I said, I'm inclined to do, not inclined to do, but that, because there is contextually dependent things happening that sort of make it more complicated and muddied than just like trans people bad.
Because you can say, well, of course the kids felt shocked and betrayed. Or, of course the judge isn't going to award custody to someone who was deceptive and circumvented his ruling. But I think the important thing here that we all need to come to a better understanding of is that regardless of the plot details, elements like this contribute to a harmful social narrative. And they might seem like teeny tiny little drops, but they are drops that add up to an ocean.
Yes, I agree. I don't have a lot to add, mainly just kind of reiterate. I would just be reiterating your points. But I think the most important thing, and is what you discussed earlier, is at least to discuss it and talk about the issues. Well, discuss them and to learn to be better about them going forward. But discussion, because just discussion for discussion's sake doesn't do anything. You have to learn from it. But that being said, I like we mentioned, I don't think this movie is quite as explicitly transphobic as I was expecting, but it was incredibly casually transphobic.
Yes.
In a way that at the time, and again, this is the contextual thing, people didn't even realize. I think, like, if I had to guess, I think that a lot of these people didn't even right.
And again, at the very least, I think we weren't having a kind of a national social conversation about these issues the way that we are now, almost 30 years later. Yeah. I guess my point too is, like I said, I don't think it's right, like you said, to just hand wave away sort of casual transphobia, especially now. Obviously now, if anything's being made, when we've had or having this discussion, have had this discussion, it's incredibly a bad idea and silly to hand wave away casual or explicit or whatever kind of transphobia now. And it's also at the same rate problematic to just hand wave it away back then and say it was a different time. But as you mentioned, you have to kind of understand media contextually. And in some ways, this movie it gets progressive about things at times. And it's interesting because in the same movie that is sort of casually transphobic a lot and sort of oblivious to that whole problematic element of the film. It's also is a movie from 1993 with an openly gay, quote, maybe married couple, maybe not, who are treated. I mean, they're seemingly embraced by all members of the family. They talk about them, and nobody's like weird. There's no jokes at their expense, unless you count like. I don't think there really are even any jokes at their expense. You could maybe argue that they're sort of that the characters they're playing are a little stereotypical. A little stereotypical, yeah.
But also, at least Harvey Fierstein is a gay man. He's the actor who plays his brother is a gay man, and they I don't know about the other actor, but so it's not some straight guy doing his best gay character. You know what I mean? Like it's Harvey Fierstein is a gay actor and activist, and so I think by that standard, especially for 1993, that's like a fairly progressive and kind of forward-thinking thing to do in your movie. Not wildly so. It's 93 and not 1973, but like still, it is interesting. But and I think also, if you give a very charitable interpretation of Mrs. Doubtfire's family monologue at the end of the movie, and I'm saying very charitable, you could expand the message that she's saying to all sorts of non-traditional families, because she does say, some families have one mom, some families have one dad, some families have a mom and a dad, some families have foster, all these different families. Now, the movie never explicitly comes out and says some families have two dads, some families have two moms.
Right.
They don't say that, and they could have, and they should have.
Yes.
I mean, they have a gay couple in the movie. You could have just it's a little weird that that's not included. Maybe they're a little worried about whatever at coming out that explicitly.
Right.
I can see that argument, because I feel like that monologue rides that line as close as it can to being like all types of families are good.
Yeah. No, I think
without
you're
explicitly saying including gay, whatever sort of.
Would it have been better had they explicitly acknowledged that? Yes.
Yeah.
But I think it does come as close as it can, and I understand in the time period why they might have felt hesitant to actually come out and say that, because even now today we still have Campbell's Soup had a gay couple in their commercial. Everybody lose their minds.
Right. Yeah.
Stop losing your minds.
Yeah. Just commoditizing your sexuality. But anyways, don't get me off on my anti-capitalism rant. I'll leave that up to way more talented YouTubers. Anyways, but yeah, but again, none of that's to dismiss the blatant and persistent problematic elements as it relates to trans people and their issues and that sort of thing. But it is complicated, an interesting topic. But I agree with what you said. You got to talk about it, and and learn to be better. So that's that.
And
that's all I have.
And hopefully we are.
Yeah, we're trying.
Some of us
are trying. We're trying. I don't know if anybody else is fucking trying.
I feel like some of us are trying to get worse.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other issue.
That's a whole other issue. All right, time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
All right, so I am actually going to do something that I have never done before. And I am going to call this one a draw.
Dun, dun, dun.
In terms of story, I do think the movie might be better.
Yeah.
I think it's objectively funnier. And I think it has a stronger storyline and message. But if I'm being honest, I'm kind of uncomfortable awarding it overall better status because of the ways that it hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
And the book isn't perfect. But it has aged a little better, in my opinion. Now, the movie is, like I said, it's almost 30 years old.
Yeah.
And there are going to be problematic elements in older media. Yeah. I don't think that should automatically make it bad.
No.
But I don't think that we should ignore that either. So it's up to you, I think, to decide how you feel about the movie and the book.
Yeah.
I would just encourage you to consume media responsibly.
Mm-hmm.
I think we all need to work towards being able to simultaneously understand that media is a product of its time and to understand that the ways in which it is a product of its time can still cause harm in the here and now. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to understand both of those things simultaneously.
Yes.
Because older media is always going to crash with our modern viewpoints.
Yeah.
But I think that if we can all learn to deal with it in a productive way, by discussing it, by listening to each other, by attempting to learn and get better, I think that we and our art will be better off for it.
Bravo.
Thank you.
Katie, what's well, before we tell the fans what's next, you can rate, subscribe. I blew that. You can subscribe to us, which you probably already are if you're listening to this, on all of the major podcast platforms. And also, if you already subscribe to us, do us a favor, leave us a review, give us a 5-star rating, rate us on whatever platform you listen to us on. If you can, not all platforms allow for that. Like, I don't think Spotify you can, but
I don't think
on
so.
iTunes, on Stitcher, wherever you're listening to us, do us a favor and hit us with one of them 5-star reviews. We're up to 41 ratings now.
Nice.
Which on iTunes, which is pretty good. Yeah. We were just at 38 like the other day, so we got 3 more in like the last week or
Sweet.
two. So.
Thanks.
Yeah. Whoever you are, we appreciate that a lot. You can also find us on all of these social medias: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and Reddit. If you just search r/thisfilmislit. Katie, what's next?
All right. So coming up next, we are beholden to our local movie theater.
Oh, it's one of those, like, we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they are making a Nancy Drew and the Hidden Staircase movie.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
If it comes to our movie theater, we're going to do that.
Yes.
I would really like to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I don't have high hopes that it's going to come to our theater because I'm not hearing a lot about it in general.
It's not a lot of buzz, but sometimes our theater gets weird little movies, though, so you never know.
You never know. But if it does not come to our movie theater, we are going to do Ella Enchanted.
Oh, okay.
So
there you go. Wonderful. So that's what you can look out for in 2 weeks' time. Until that time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else,
keep reading books.
Keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.